Jennifer Rose was slapped with a $500 fine for her dog's excessive barking, a claim as absurd as it was infuriating. Her Labrador, Baxter, was quiet and gentle, but HOA President Karen Wilson smugly dismissed her protests with a cold, "Rules are rules." Karen, notorious for abusing her authority, had no idea Jennifer was armed with undeniable evidence, proof that not only cleared her name but would expose Karen's shocking hypocrisy. What came next left the entire neighborhood stunned. But let's start from the beginning. Jennifer Rose never thought her peaceful suburban life would become the epicenter of conflict. A single mother with 2 kids, she cherished her modest home, a cozy, warm haven where she and her children built a life filled with laughter and love. At the heart of their little family was Baxter, a gentle Labrador who was as much a family member as anyone else. With his wagging tail and soulful eyes, Baxter was a source of comfort and joy, especially during difficult times. One chilly autumn morning, Jennifer stood at her mailbox, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. The neighborhood was calm, with the scent of fallen leaves lingering in the air. As she flipped through the usual stack of advertisements and utility bills, a particular envelope caught her eye. The HOA logo was stamped boldly across it, and her stomach tightened. While the HOA occasionally sent out notices about community events or minor rule adjustments, this letter felt different. She ripped it open and scanned the contents. Her hands began to shake as she read the words. Notice of violation. Excessive dog barking. Fine. $500. A wave of confusion and frustration washed over her. Baxter? Excessive barking? It was absurd. He was the calmest dog she'd ever known. Jennifer's mind raced as she replayed the past few weeks, trying to recall any incident where Baxter might have caused a disturbance. Nothing came to mind. Her initial reaction was disbelief, but as she reread the letter, anger took hold. How could they accuse her of something so baseless? Determined to resolve the issue, she called the HOA office immediately. The phone rang a few times before a clipped, authoritative voice answered. It was Karen Wilson, the president of the HOA, a woman known for her rigid enforcement of rules and her knack for turning minor infractions into full-blown crises. "Ms. Rose, I assume you've received our notice," Karen said, her tone cold and indifferent. "Yes, and I'm calling because this has to be some sort of mistake," Jennifer replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Baxter doesn't bark excessively. He's hardly ever outside without me, and even then he's quiet." Karen interrupted her with a dismissive laugh. "We've received multiple complaints from your neighbors. The fine stands. You can pay it by the end of the month to avoid further penalties." Jennifer's blood boiled. "But no one spoke to me directly about this. How can you issue a fine without proof?" Karen's voice sharpened. "We don't need to justify our decisions to every homeowner. If you have an issue, you're welcome to file an appeal in writing, but I wouldn't count on much changing. Rules are rules, Ms. Rose." Jennifer hung up the phone, her heart pounding. She felt both humiliated and powerless. How could someone wield so much control over her life with just a single letter? But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let this go without a fight. Over the next few days, Jennifer began talking to her neighbors. Many were sympathetic and reassured her that they hadn't heard any excessive barking. "Baxter, he's a sweetheart," said Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who often walked by her house. "I've never heard a peep out of him." Still, there were whispers of fear among the residents. Karen Wilson was notorious for her hardline approach to HOA management. Some neighbors admitted they'd received fines for minor infractions, like leaving garbage cans out too long or having slightly overgrown hedges. Many paid without protest, unwilling to challenge Karen's authority. Jennifer refused to back down. This wasn't just about a fine, it was about principle. If they can do this to me, what's stopping them from targeting anyone else? She thought. But as determined as she was, the weight of the situation began to take a toll. Nights that were once peaceful turned restless as she lay awake, worrying about the potential consequences. On one such night, she sat in her living room, stroking Baxter's soft fur as he dozed beside her. The room was dimly lit, and the muffled sounds of a distant television provided a faint backdrop. Jennifer's gaze fell on her laptop. An idea struck her. If she couldn't rely on the HOA to provide evidence, she'd gather her own. The next morning, she purchased a set of security cameras and installed them around her property. If Baxter truly was the source of the disturbance, the footage would reveal it. But deep down, Jennifer knew her dog wasn't to blame. This wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about standing up to an unfair system that thrived on intimidation. The cameras were discreet but strategically placed, covering the front yard, backyard, and the area near her fence where complaints had allegedly originated. Jennifer felt a renewed sense of control. For the first time since receiving the notice, she felt like she had a chance to fight back. As days turned into weeks, Jennifer diligently reviewed the footage every evening. To her relief, Baxter was exactly as she expected. Quiet, well-behaved, and content to lounge in the sun or play with her kids. But as she scanned through the recordings one night, something caught her attention. A loud, persistent barking echoed in the background, but it wasn't coming from her property. Jennifer rewound the footage and focused on the source of the noise. Her heart raced as the truth became clear. The barking was coming from Karen Wilson's yard. On the video, Karen's large, aggressive dog could be seen pacing along the fence, barking incessantly at passers-by. Jennifer's anger flared, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She finally had the proof she needed. Jennifer sat frozen in front of her laptop, the video playing on loop. There it was. Undeniable proof that Karen Wilson's dog, not Baxter, was the source of the neighborhood noise complaints. For a moment, she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. It was almost comical. Here she was, accused of a violation, while the president of the HOA herself was blatantly guilty. But this wasn't just hypocrisy. This was a deliberate act of intimidation. Jennifer's initial relief quickly gave way to a surge of determination. This was her chance to expose the truth. She carefully saved the video clips to multiple devices, ensuring she wouldn't lose the evidence. But she knew she couldn't stop at just video footage. She needed more if she wanted to make a strong case. The next morning, Jennifer reached out to her neighbors again. She began with the Thompsons, the elderly couple who lived next door. "I've been reviewing security footage," she explained, showing them a snippet of the barking dog. "This is Karen's dog, not Baxter. Have you ever heard anything like this?" Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses and squinted at the screen. "That's exactly the barking I've been hearing. And it's been going on for months," he said, shaking his head. "I always thought it was strange that they blamed your dog. Baxter's a quiet boy." Encouraged, Jennifer visited other neighbors, sharing the footage and asking for their input. Many expressed outrage when they realized the truth. "Karen's dog has been a nuisance for years," said Mrs. Alvarez, who lived across the street. "But no one ever dared to say anything. She's too powerful." Jennifer jotted down everything. Statements from neighbors, dates of incidents, and any relevant details they could provide. Her goal was to build an airtight case that would force the HOA to drop the fine and hold Karen accountable. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen might retaliate. The woman had a reputation for being ruthless, and Jennifer wasn't naive about the potential consequences. Later that week, Jennifer decided to consult an attorney. She scheduled a meeting with David Harper, a local lawyer known for his expertise in homeowner rights and HOA disputes. Sitting in his modest office, she laid out her case, showing him the video footage and explaining the situation. David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is solid evidence," he said, nodding. "Karen Wilson not only issued a baseless fine, but if she knew her dog was the real problem, this could be considered bad faith on her part. The HOA has an obligation to enforce rules fairly, and this is a clear abuse of power." Jennifer felt a flicker of hope as David outlined her options. "You can file an appeal with the HOA board directly, but given Karen's influence, it might not get far. Alternatively, we could escalate this to legal action. With enough support from your neighbors, we could argue that Karen's behavior is damaging the community." Despite her newfound confidence, Jennifer knew she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was standing up for everyone in the neighborhood who had suffered under Karen's oppressive rule. But before making any drastic moves, she wanted to give the HOA one last chance to address the issue internally. At the next HOA meeting, Jennifer arrived early, armed with her evidence. The meeting was held in a small community center where residents gathered to discuss neighborhood concerns. Karen presided over the meeting from the head of the table, her demeanor as commanding as ever. She didn't seem fazed by Jennifer's presence, though a flicker of irritation crossed her face when Jennifer approached the podium to speak. "Thank you for allowing me to address the board," Jennifer began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm here to discuss the recent fine I received for alleged dog barking. I've reviewed the evidence extensively, and I'd like to present what I've found." She pulled out her laptop and played the footage for the board members and attendees. The room fell silent as the unmistakable sound of Karen's dog echoed through the speakers. Jennifer paused the video, pointing to the screen. "This barking is not coming from my property. It's coming from the yard of Karen Wilson, our HOA president." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red, but she quickly composed herself. "This is absurd," she snapped. "That video could be doctored. Besides, this meeting isn't the place for personal grievances." Jennifer didn't back down. "This isn't personal. This is about fairness. You've fined me for something my dog didn't do, while ignoring the real source of the problem. I also have statements from multiple neighbors confirming this." She held up a folder containing signed statements and additional documentation. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, Karen seemed at a loss for words, but she quickly regained her composure. "The board will review your evidence and respond in due course," she said curtly, signaling the end of the discussion. Jennifer left the meeting feeling both exhilarated and anxious. She had stood her ground, but she knew Karen wouldn't let this slide easily. That night, as she reviewed her notes and prepared for the next steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Jennifer woke the morning after the HOA meeting feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. She had exposed Karen's hypocrisy in front of the entire community, but she knew the battle wasn't over. Karen Wilson wasn't the type to admit defeat gracefully. The silence from the HOA in the days following the meeting only deepened Jennifer's anxiety. She felt like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Her fears were confirmed later that week when a second letter arrived in her mailbox. Jennifer's stomach sank as she recognized the HOA logo. She ripped the envelope open, her hands trembling, and read the contents. It was another violation notice, this time claiming that her property's landscaping was non-compliant and imposing a new fine of $300. The accusations were absurd. Jennifer's yard was well maintained, with neatly trimmed grass and vibrant flower beds. "This is retaliation," Jennifer muttered to herself, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Karen was clearly using her position to intimidate her, but Jennifer wasn't about to back down. Instead, she doubled down on her efforts to gather support from the community. Over the weekend, she organized a small gathering at her home, inviting neighbors who had expressed frustration with Karen's leadership. People trickled in, bringing coffee and baked goods, and soon Jennifer's living room buzzed with conversation. "I've had enough of her nonsense," said Mr. Thompson, shaking his head. "She fined me $50 last year because my trash can was out for an hour longer than usual." Mrs. Alvarez nodded in agreement. "And don't forget how she tried to charge us for using holiday lights. It's like she's running her own little dictatorship." As the group shared their grievances, Jennifer noticed a sense of camaraderie forming among the neighbors. It wasn't just her fight anymore. This was about holding Karen accountable for years of overreach and abuse of power. Together, they brainstormed a plan. Jennifer would continue to appeal the fines through official channels while the rest of the group worked on rallying more community members to attend the next HOA meeting. Meanwhile, Jennifer knew she needed to strengthen her case. She reached out to David Harper, her attorney, and shared the latest violation notice. David wasn't surprised by Karen's actions. "This is classic retaliation," he said. "She's trying to wear you down so you'll give up, but this only strengthens your case. We'll document every action she takes against you." Jennifer also decided to dig deeper into Karen's history as HOA president. She spent hours researching the HOA's financial records, meeting minutes, and old newsletters. What she found left her stunned. Over the past 3 years, Karen had increased HOA fines by 40%, yet the community improvements promised in the budget never materialized. Additionally, several large expenditures were marked as administrative costs, with no further explanation. Armed with this information, Jennifer returned to David. "If she's mismanaging funds, the entire community needs to know," she said. David agreed and began drafting a formal complaint to the HOA board, outlining not only Jennifer's personal grievances, but also the potential financial misconduct. The following week, Jennifer noticed subtle but undeniable signs of escalation. Karen's dog began barking more frequently, often late at night, as if intentionally provoking her. Karen herself seemed to make a point of walking by Jennifer's house, casting icy glares in her direction. Jennifer's kids even mentioned that they overheard Karen bad-mouthing their family at the local park. Despite the mounting pressure, Jennifer refused to back down. She focused on her goal, exposing Karen's misconduct and ensuring fairness for the entire community. With each passing day, more neighbors joined her cause, emboldened by her determination. They began posting about their experiences with Karen on social media, and soon the story gained traction outside their neighborhood. Local journalists reached out to Jennifer, intrigued by the tale of a small-town woman standing up to an overbearing HOA president. Jennifer hesitated at first, worried about the additional scrutiny, but ultimately decided to share her story. "This isn't just about me," she told one reporter. "It's about protecting everyone's rights and holding people in power accountable." As the story spread, Karen's carefully constructed image began to crack. The once untouchable president of the HOA was now facing public criticism and growing dissent within her own community. But Jennifer knew this was only the beginning. The next HOA meeting would be the true test, a showdown that could determine the future of the neighborhood and whether justice would prevail. The night before the meeting, Jennifer sat in her living room with Baxter curled up at her feet. She looked around at the signs of her life. Family photos on the mantel, a pile of school books on the coffee table, and a pair of muddy sneakers by the door. This was what she was fighting for: her home, her family, and her peace of mind. No matter how intimidating Karen tried to be, Jennifer knew she couldn't afford to give up now. The night of the HOA meeting had finally arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Jennifer arrived early, armed with her evidence, a carefully prepared statement, and the support of her neighbors. The small community center was packed, with standing room only as residents crowded in to witness what many were calling the showdown. Karen Wilson sat at the head of the table, her usual air of authority faltering under the weight of the growing dissent. Her expression was steely, but Jennifer could see the cracks, a twitch of her jaw, a quick glance around the room as if gauging the mood. Jennifer took her seat near the front, her heart pounding. She glanced around the room, reassured by the nods and encouraging smiles from her neighbors. They weren't just spectators tonight. They were her allies. When the meeting began, Karen called the room to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Tonight's agenda is full," she announced, her voice carrying an edge of irritation. "So let's move quickly through any resident concerns." Jennifer raised her hand, and Karen's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Rose," she said curtly, "you may address the board." Jennifer stood, her palms slightly damp but her resolve firm. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here tonight to address not only the baseless fines issued against me, but also a pattern of misuse of power that has affected our entire community." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Jennifer continued, pulling out her laptop and connecting it to the projector. "I've brought evidence to support my claims. First, the barking fine issued against me was entirely unjustified. This video footage clearly shows that the barking comes from the yard of Karen Wilson." The room fell silent as the video played, the sound of Karen's dog echoing through the speakers. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by whispered conversations. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face flushed with anger. "That's not conclusive," Karen interrupted, her voice sharp. "This could have been recorded at any time." Jennifer didn't flinch. "I anticipated that response," she said calmly, clicking to another slide. "Here are the timestamps and logs from my security cameras. They align perfectly with the dates and times noted in the complaint." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Jennifer didn't give her the chance. "And that's not all," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've also gathered statements from multiple neighbors who confirm that Karen's dog has been the source of noise disturbances, not mine." Jennifer handed copies of the signed statements to the board members, who began flipping through them with furrowed brows. The atmosphere in the room was electric, a mix of shock and vindication, as residents realized the extent of Karen's hypocrisy. But Jennifer wasn't finished. "While reviewing this case, I also discovered irregularities in the HOA's financial records," she said, pulling up another slide. "Over the past 3 years, fines have increased significantly. Yet, promised community improvements have not been delivered. Additionally, several large expenditures are listed under vague categories like administrative costs, with no detailed explanation." The room erupted in whispers, and Karen's face turned pale. Jennifer gestured toward her attorney, David Harper, who stood to address the room. "My client has evidence suggesting potential financial misconduct within the HOA," he said. "We recommend a full audit of the association's finances and an independent review of its leadership practices." The murmurs grew louder, and several residents stood to voice their support. "I've been fined unfairly too," one woman called out. "Where's all the money going?" shouted another. Karen slammed her gavel, her voice trembling. "Order! This meeting is not the place for baseless accusations." But the crowd wasn't listening. The tide had turned, and the community was no longer afraid to speak up. One by one, residents shared their stories of unfair fines, intimidation, and Karen's heavy-handed leadership. It was clear that Jennifer's courage had sparked something powerful, a collective demand for accountability. As the meeting reached its climax, the board members conferred in hushed tones. Finally, the vice president of the HOA stood to address the room. "We've heard the concerns of the community," he said, his tone measured. "Effective immediately, we will suspend all outstanding fines until a full audit of the HOA's finances and practices can be conducted. Additionally, a special vote will be held to determine whether Karen Wilson should remain as president." The room erupted into applause and cheers. Jennifer felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had stood up to Karen and brought the community together to demand change. Karen sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. She opened her mouth to protest, but the crowd's energy drowned her out. It was clear that her reign of unchecked authority was coming to an end. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors flocked to Jennifer, thanking her for her bravery and determination. "You gave us the courage to stand up," said Mrs. Alvarez, tears in her eyes. "We owe you so much." Jennifer smiled, the weight of weeks of stress finally lifting. "We did this together," she said. "This is our community, and we have the power to make it better." Epilogue. In the weeks that followed, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. The financial audit revealed significant mismanagement, and Karen Wilson was forced to step down. A new, more transparent leadership team was elected, and the community began to heal. For Jennifer, the victory was deeply personal. As she sat on her porch one sunny afternoon, sipping coffee and watching her kids play with Baxter, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her home was hers again, a sanctuary safe from intimidation and injustice. And as for Karen, well, she had learned the hard way that no one, not even an HOA president, is above accountability.